Would you like to experience a shift in your career? You may be frustrated to see the same workplace patterns repeat or feel that work lacks purpose, respect, or compensation. To get relief, you may have talked with friends or family, read books, watched YouTube, or taken courses. All good strategies if you get unstuck quickly and move towards your goal. But if you're frustrated with your progress, you need an expert guide to become the hero of your own work story. And that's where I come in. My name is Marie Gervais, and I help people move from work trauma to career transformation. With a doctorate in culture and learning in the workplace, certification in emotional freedom coaching, and as a training and development professional, I've helped hundreds of stuck career professionals gain new insights and release what is not serving them. So if you're ready to turn wishful thinking into a meaningful, well-compensated career and are hungry to experience the power of coaching to get you there, let's talk. Get a taste of what career success could be for you. Go to trycoaching.link/biz. Biz is spelled B-I-S. See you there. Hello, Culture and Leadership Connections listeners. Today, I'm happy to present to you Breno Araujo, who is the founder and CEO at Boto, which is a platform that allows anyone to build and share automations surrounding Web3 and blockchain. Through Boto, Breno is focused on changing the narrative of the tech bro culture, which I'm going to ask him more about. And he's very invested in his community and learning from the community because everything that he does is community-generated content. He's from Brazil, studied robotics, moved to Europe, worked in London, joined Repo, where he's in charge of revenue intelligence, and then left to start his own startup company from scratch, where the first person he hired was the manager or director of community, which shows how much he's interested in the user experience and building of community and user-generated content. So welcome, Breno, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Marie.
Tell us a little bit more about you, growing up, who you are, some more personal things about you.
Like you mentioned, I grew up in Brazil until I was 24. I was still in Brazil. So most of my childhood, personality, friends, I think it has a lot to do with that. I did grow up in a family of entrepreneurs. So I guess, my parents all had their own companies, and before that, my grandparents. So I think from a very early age, I remember myself always wanted to have my own business. I was also very much into technology. Literally next to my crib, there was a computer because of my parents. Very early on in our life, we ended up having to move into a small apartment where literally my brother and I and my parents lived in the same bedroom for many years. So we were like 8 people in a small apartment. And literally my father's computer was between both cribs. So I remember that, Yeah, and I remember playing games on that computer, and that really fascinated me. And then everything related to computer, I would build my own computers. I started coding when I was 12, and I think that absolutely shaped me in terms of being into technology.
That's a great story. I'm just trying to imagine 8 people and a computer all in one small room.
It was my parents' apartment. It was like a 3-bed apartment, but then my grandmother moved in with 3 of my uncles and aunts because unfortunately my grandfather died in a home robbery when I was 3 years old. And then that's why we ended up all in the same small apartment for a long time.
It gave you a chance to connect and support each other, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So can you share a couple of incidents from your childhood? You already started going down that road just a minute ago, but a couple of incidents from your childhood that you believe made you into the person you are today.
I think having the technology so close to me definitely made me curious and, into very much a tech person, and not just that, autodidact, because I taught myself those things. I learned how to use a computer and to use things. And at that time, everything was in English. So it wasn't even my language, but I had to figure things out on my own. I think other incidents, I would say my family had gone to ups and downs, like probably many entrepreneurs and many people who can relate to that, who had entrepreneur parents. So when I was 13, they bankrupted their company and my mom had to start from scratch. So I've seen my parents, especially my mom, start from scratch multiple times. My grandmother had multiple businesses. She would always start something new, and I would work on their business when I was very young. I would leave school and go there. So I think that work ethics, I really got a lot from my mom and my grandmother, from seeing them doing business and starting from scratch over and over again and managing to be successful and raise me and my brother and the family. So I would say that's definitely a strong one.
Yeah, and then learning to pick yourself up and find a creative way to restart. I'm sure that was part of that whole experience too, eh?
For sure, and make you less afraid of falling because you see that, okay, pick yourself up.
Yeah. You can see that people can rebound after difficulty. Then it takes the fear out of the risk. Yeah, those are great. Thank you for sharing those.
Mm-hmm.
So something in the groups that you were born into would have influenced you. Brazilian culture, there could have been the religious context in which you were born. It could be also whether you were in an urban or in a rural environment, region, ethnicity, extended family, everything that we're born into influences us in some way, shape, or form. So what would you say a couple of those influences were from you, from those groups that you were born into?
A couple of things that come to my mind. One of them is how friendly people are in Brazil, how open they are, how social they are. So I would say with the four types of communication styles, the blue, green, yellow, red,
Yep.
and or if your listeners are, but
the true colors inventory. Yeah.
so a lot of people there are very social, and everyone in Brazil is a bit social, regardless of what color they have. They always have a bit of that color. And I would say I'm not sure if I was much of that, but that reflects on how I am, or at least when I'm in social situations. But I wouldn't say that's part of my personality. I think that was really created because of where I was, because of being always involved in things, and there's always something happening, and you're always big groups of people, and you end up getting used to it. I think if I had been born in other countries, I would be way more reclusive and introvert, and probably would have difficulty in situations where there's a lot of people. But because of Brazil, I think it was kind of like forced in me.
Good insight.
And the other one, I think, was you mentioned about Politico. And I think in Brazil, one of the things that even from a very early age, I was very exposed to poverty and other things, around. And I'm from Rio, and you have a lot of poverty as well. It was always very sad to me to see kids, in need. And that really, really made me want to be fair. And it's definitely something very deep in me. And I think for sure there was something already in me, but because of growing up seeing that so closely, it really shaped how I am.
Empathy and wanting people to have a fair chance and an opportunity at life.
Yes.
Yeah. So as you were growing up, you joined certain groups. Could be professional groups. You certainly moved to different countries, and you would have learned different languages. What have you adopted into your culture? I mean, you don't change your culture, but you can add on to it, right? So what would you say you've added on?
You can absolutely add on, and you can definitely adjust some of your traits, right? Professionally speaking, my professional ethics are very different than when I work with Brazilians. So I can see how moving countries have changed my way. So I would say two groups that made a big difference. One of them was joining INSEAD and doing my MBA there. It's one of the top MBA schools, so it was hard to get there. It was my dream to get there. When you get there, you have this diversity. So we had more than 85 nationalities in our group. But at the same time, with the diversity, there is some common ground. So first of all, people are very open to other cultures, very open to other people's opinion. Pretty much everyone there is a high achiever. So joining that group certainly made me more comfortable and open to other cultures, more curious about other cultures. And the other thing was when I started working with startups from the Bay Area, the style of work, the professional ethics and the working hours, how people treat each other, how people list. I think the culture in the company is the nicest I worked for are the companies from the Bay Area. And
really,
for me,
really, I'd like you to talk about that a little bit more, because that's not what I've heard about the Bay Area tech culture.
I mean, the worst one I also worked for was also from the Bay Area. So, okay, maybe it's not a Bay Area thing, but I found my fit with the startups. And the reason for that was in most startups from the Bay Area, people have equity on the company, which makes that people align more with their goals. In big corporations, exactly. So in big corporations, you might say, oh, I'm not going to do this. It's not part of my job, or, this is not going to advance my career. It might advance yours. But when everyone has a share of the company, you think like, okay, but this is good for the company. This is good for my share, right? And then the smaller company, less bureaucracy, less process, things are more efficient, and efficiency is a big part of my personality. So for me, that is very important. And I also found that people are more open to ideas and reward you for hard work and merit more than larger corporations where I felt like politics were more important. Being friends with the right person was more important, which was never my interest.
Gave you a more sincere, authentic way to work with people without having a hidden agenda. You could just move forward and negotiate things as required.
Yeah, and I feel like every young person wants to make a difference, right? Everyone wants to make a difference, but especially when you're young, fresh out of uni, you're like, you want to do something, and the worst place for you is a big corporation.
Oh, I agree.
Fresh out of uni, you're not going to make any difference.
Yeah, that's where idealism goes to die.
Yeah, dreams. And so if you want to have a voice, if you want to get responsibilities, smaller company, you are more likely to get those, right? So I feel like we give a lot of responsibility to young people, new people in the company. And I always try to do that more and more. And I had a chance in my first job to get a lot of responsibility. I worked for a small company in Brazil first. And after you have a taste of that, then I worked for a company that was the largest private company in Latin America, which was in terms of feeling like you're making a difference. You feel like if you die tomorrow and the company doesn't make a difference at all, then how can you be making a difference, right? Yeah.
I totally hear you. Well, that's great. I think an ideal and a dream and wanting to make a difference is something that you started with young in life and you just kept finding more opportunities to do that in, right?
Yes.
Which leads me to the question about your temperament and your personality. So you already alluded to that. What were you born with that people keep saying, oh, yeah, that's Breno. He's always been like that. And then personality that you added onto, which you also alluded to and said that you built in, efficiency and work ethics that were not the same. So maybe speak to that a little bit more and go deeper. What were you born with and what have you added on to your personality along the way?
So efficiency was always there. I was always very focused on doing things, getting things done. I love creating and building things. That was always a big part of my passion. And that's why I think part of why tech was always very interesting for me, because I could create things without much resource, like if I had access to a computer, right? So that was always a big part of it. And some of the problems with it is that I was, very assertive, and I can be a bit difficult to argue with, because people would find it difficult to argue with me because, well, first, I enjoy arguing about things and discussing because I want to know more. I want to know your point of view. And I want to know mine, and I want to share, and I want to discuss and find out what is best. But that can come at a cost. And throughout my career, I had problems with that, especially early on when I was younger. Problems with people finding that I was difficult to work with or difficult to manage.
You would say that's not a Brazilian trait to enjoy arguing?
That perhaps is, but in the book I read, the color was red, and I don't know if it's the same. If I'm quoting the right color, but my personality, I'm very much a red. And it's not just arguing, it's efficiency, is not wasting time.
And it's learning things very quickly, because you learn and then can master things much faster than others can.
Yeah, that's very true. People would always say, like, I'm in 220 volts, which is like the expression where I come from to mean you're fast. And actually, my nickname was Speed Gonzalez. And because of how I used to do things, and I was always like that, very fast and learning fast. And the same, I like to think about things a lot. And when I think about things, I think many levels deep and I focus on, and I don't like to waste time. So when people argue without logic, without base, I had problems in school. I couldn't pay attention. Whenever someone came I was paying attention to class, and at the moment someone asked a question and it goes towards the direction, I lose attention. I also had dyslexia, so I couldn't, for example, copy what was written. So I had to rely a lot on my memory, and I do have a good memory. And one of the reasons I could remember things well is because I pay more attention to the logic, because once you understand, it's easy to remember. You can't memorize things, right? You can't. And that's why I really suffered in classes like history and other things, because it's hard. There's no logic many times, right? You just need to memorize, and I struggle. Of course, you're going to struggle if you can't take notes. So I don't know if that helps, but it paints a picture of how I am or who I am, I think.
It does. It sounds to me like you're a combination of red and green. So the green is people who are visionary, high-minded thinkers and who don't tolerate incompetency very well. So if you learn quickly and you happen to be in a situation where people around you are incompetent or poorly informed or misinformed, it's very hard not to dismiss them if that's your personality type.
That's it. And then back from my Brazilian roots, arguments get heated. It's normal to show emotions in Brazil.
Because it shows that you're engaged in the relationship.
Yeah. And that caused many problems for me in Europe, especially, And
yeah, I can see why. Except maybe in France, where they love to argue.
Yeah, but
in Italy, people love to argue too, but it's different.
That's true. When you say Europe is a problem because it's such a big continent and so different, you're absolutely right. When I go to Italy, I'm at home.
Yeah.
People show emotion, they talk with their hands. But I moved to Switzerland. I didn't move to Italy, and
oh yeah, no, that's going to be hard.
Yeah, and then London wasn't that much different. People quite hide their emotions quite deep in London as well, because you have this whole etiquette of the English, right? And everywhere you go where people are more composed, most of the time they show less emotion for whatever reason. And in Brazil, people do show their emotion just like the Italians do. And that was also a problem, because if you marry that with like you said, green and orange, and being this person who doesn't want to waste time, and so the emotions come and kick in very easily. And that was always a problem in my career. So I had to really work on that. I'm never going to be another color. That's impossible. But at least I feel like I can manage things a little bit better today.
I hear you. Yeah, I totally hear you. It was very similar. So it's the same kind of idea that I would be confrontational. People would perceive it as being a direct personal attack. But I was just saying, well, prove your idea, And if you can't prove your idea, why should I listen to you? And that was just always taken as you are attacking me personally. And it was very, very hard for me to learn to tone that down. So I can certainly relate.
That's exactly it. I am confrontational, and that's what people were saying, but that's exactly it. I'm just trying to understand and explain to me, But what also happens with, depending on the personality, the body will shut down many ways, like with hormones and things, and they will have even struggle even more to explain with logic, because then the
They
moment the
will.
emotional brain comes in, the rational brain struggles more, right? Which
Yeah,
I
it's
don't
the
have.
nervous
Yeah,
system. The nervous system
yeah,
just feels threatened and they shut down. Yeah.
and,
So, and
yeah.
if you recognize that, that's why you've been able to make progress because you're going, oh, I don't want to shut people down. Right. So
And
that's
then you
why
need to
then,
realize you're shutting them down and that you need to
yeah, you just
slow
need to
down.
do something that helps them to feel safer. Because if you care about reaching your goal and you care about the people you're working with, you're not going to want them to shut down and feel intimidated. So it sounds to me like you know that.
I know that, but I still struggle. My last meeting before this call, I knew I was running out of time because I had to go and pick up my baby. And I was like, when those things happen, running out of time and I need to get to the solution of this, then I become less patient with waiting for the person. And then it becomes a problem again. But I know it is a problem. I work on it and I have made progress, but I still find that on a frequent basis that I could have done this better. But yeah.
Well, your self reflection is very good. And I'm sure you're making many autocorrections as you go along. And I think we have to go through some of those extremes in order to get to wisdom. If you don't have any extreme experiences, you don't learn how to mitigate things. You don't develop the skills that you need to become wise. That's my take on it.
That's very true. I often think that if you don't look back at something that makes you uncomfortable and say like, oh, I'm embarrassed of having doing that, then sometimes you go back to that. You don't evolve. I mean, don't get obsessed about them, but still being able to be embarrassed about something and regret something, it's a point that you're going to move and change and improve, right?
It also gives you a lens of humility.
Yes. Humility is so important. Definitely one of the values that we have in the company that we measure our employees on. We do this assessment where most of the focus is not on performance, is on cultural fit.
What's this assessment?
So, like most companies will do an assessment and check, oh, have you hit your numbers, and your bonus is attached to that. So the first thing, we don't have bonus. We focus on equity, right? And so it's a bit more long term instead of short term. And then that assessment for your career assessment or in general growth, instead of focusing on your performance is one small part out of 8. The other 7 are all values of the company that we all together collectively agree that those are values we want to carry on and will help us to be a better company in the long term. One of them is humility, and you get assessed by all the peers in the company. So we just started, right? We are 1-year-old companies. We only done that first round now with half of the team, but it's been great to see that so far and see how it can help people to feel that first, how their peers perceive them, which in most cases it's been better than people expected, which is great, but also help you to see which areas that you could be improving, which areas to focus, right? So one of them is humility. We have fairness, we have ownership, effectiveness, community. So to give an example, when we assess community, we ask like, do you take the community voice into consideration when you're doing your work? Right. So it's not just your voice, your boss voice. You're taking also in consideration what the users are saying, what Boto community basically is saying. Do you interact with them? Do you contribute? Meaning, do you write an article, build something, added content to the website that will be used by the community? So these are kind of like the 3 main questions for communities. And then we check where everyone is landing. And the idea is really that as a company, like I mentioned before, right, culture is more of a fit than good or bad. There are bad cultures, but in general, you also need to see if you fit that culture. So when we see that, we are saying, hey, these are things that us as a company collectively believe it's important and we like to fit in that culture, right?
This is beautiful. I mean, it just makes me want to say, hey, how do I sign up? It truly is unique, I think, in the tech world, where startup founders tend to be engineers with a vision and they exclude everything and everybody except what they want. And so you're painting a picture of a community that promotes equity and gives everybody a voice and holds them accountable to listening to everybody's voices. It's promoting global prosperity.
Yeah. At some point, I had a website called Salary Guru, and the idea was that I always found so unfair the remuneration versus the value that person is adding to the company. And that was one of the things. But in general, I found that so many things were unfair in companies. And part of it, I thought, was to blame human resources way of managing the company. And if you think about one of the things I started paying attention in the companies I worked for is that human resource seems to be an afterthought. When you're a small company, a startup, a big part of a founder's job is to be the human resource, right? Is to hire, to fire, to promote. But then who is the next C-level that they bring in? It's typically a T a CTO, a CFO,
Mm-hmm.
a COO, a CMO. When does the HR comes in? Is always later. And sometimes it's even a sub job of one of those C's.
But not in your case. You
Not
hired
in my
a
case.
manager of community right from the get-go.
Yes. And for me, like internally in the company, it's still my role as HR, but I always think like, this is something that is bigger, is the most important thing of the company. Because if you want this to be a good place in the long term, so many companies have fallen because of that, because they fail to recognize when people are talented, to promote them, to give them responsibilities, and they fail to recognize the bad apples. So one of the ways of looking also of this assessment in terms of cultural fit instead of performance is to find the bad apples. Because as an employee, you might show one face to your boss, right? Or you might act one way with your boss, but not necessarily with all your peers. So when I'm asking peers to assess someone on a cultural level, not on a performance level, so you might have an outperformer that is like a dick. And in that case, it's going to show on the cultural fit assessment that this person is not a team player, is not a good fit, is a bad apple, is a bad agent. And it's going to be either easy to start correcting or to get to remove that bad apple, So I think companies often fail that. So many bad apples I've seen being promoted because they just have good numbers.
Yeah, but
But
that doesn't matter because eventually the company implodes or
exactly,
explodes because they haven't developed an internal sustainable structure that's built on trustworthy human relationships.
exactly short-sighted.
Yeah. That's a really lovely way of explaining it, the way you talked about the whole role of human resources as being really central to how a company should see itself rather than being an afterthought. So tell me about a time when you became aware that, and wait a minute, I just want to back up on this. I'm just thinking about you growing up in a bedroom with 8 people and a computer
No,
between the two
the
cribs.
bedroom
How
was,
how,
yeah,
how did okay maybe the bedroom with maybe 8 people in the
in
whole
the apartment.
apartment. But you know what? You had to learn to get along, didn't you?
I still don't get along with some of the people in my family now, but
And how to protect yourself against some of the bad
you
apples,
either
maybe
get
too.
along or you hate each other. Some people in the apartment still hate each other to the gut. So yeah, but but sorry, what the
Sorry, I
question?
just was just sidetracked by that little thought. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, so let's go to the idea that, I mean, you've moved to different countries, you've worked with different cultures, and you've created your own. So there have got to be some moments when you just felt like, whoa, wait a minute. The way I think things are is just my sense of culture and not necessarily how other people see things. A moment when you had a cultural shock. Can you think of one?
Oh, cultural shock moments, so many.
I thought so.
Yeah, I had many cultural shocks, but I think one of the biggest ones was definitely moving to Switzerland. I was 24 years old. I moved from Rio, extremely lively town where people are extremely social, friendly, open, to Switzerland, which is one of the most opposite in so many ways.
Yes.
In quality of living, in terms of salary, and moving from a place where people would literally come to my house and knock on the door and say, "Hey, we need to go somewhere," and like they won't get a no for an answer. They're gonna drag you out, and you're gonna have to go out with them or whatever. To a place where when you ask people, "Hey, can we meet?" Like you're asking a close friend, and they say, "Oh yeah, in 3 weeks," and in 4 weeks. And if you say like, "But what about today? Let's make a barbecue." I'm like, "What are you doing?" "I'm doing nothing, but I scheduled to do nothing today, so I'm doing nothing." And it's like, that's what my calendar says. I'm doing nothing. So it, it was huge. And well, it taught me how to be more organized in many ways because my first weekend here, I realized that on Sundays, restaurants don't open. Like Sunday's the time everyone goes to a restaurant. Well, the restaurant's not opening. I mean, there are exceptions, but vast majority don't open on Sunday. And it's like, okay, supermarket also doesn't open. What? How am I gonna eat? And it's like in Brazil, you just figure out on the day what you want to do, what you want to eat, and you can just go and everything's gonna be open, and it just makes you have to plan ahead, and plan ahead for everything. I must say, this kind of has traumatized me in some ways, but in other
Mhm.
ways, it has developed some skills such as planning and being organized. I'm certainly a bit paranoid. I had to move back here to Switzerland. I'm in Switzerland right now during this call, and because my wife was doing an MBA here. And honestly, like I'm still a bit terrorized every time there's a letter that arrives on my mailbox. I'm like, what did I do wrong this time? What is the new
Yeah,
fine I'm
yeah.
going to receive? What is it? They have some really strange laws. Like I was putting a picture up on my wall on a Sunday, and it's like, 1 p.m. and then someone comes knocking on the door. This is forbidden. I'm going to call the police. I'm like, when am I supposed to do that? I only have time on Sundays, like, no, Sundays, no noise. Like my friends here tell me that when they were growing up, they were not allowed to call their friends on Sundays because Sundays you're not supposed to bother or call or making any noise. You're supposed to be invisible. No, it's
I
like
can
that's some
say this
really
is just the antithesis of Brazilian way of doing things.
totally. It's funny, like in Brazil, I know some people who their parents would put money on their pockets before, like in case someone tries to rob you, you have some money, they're going to take that money, they're going to hurt you, right?
Right.
In Switzerland, my friends were growing up, their parents would put money in their pocket, but it was for the police because in Switzerland at that time when they were growing up, I'm 36, right? So my friends, similar age, it was forbidden to be on the street without having at least 5 francs of cash in your pocket against the law. They would take you to, in theory, I don't know anyone that actually got arrested for it or anything, but it's such an extreme, like how can you forbid people to walk around the street without money? In Brazil, people don't have money. You can't forbid them to walk around without money. Like, first of all, you need to give them money if you want to forbid them to walk around without money. So there's so many extremes. It's incredible. Like there's still a law.
I feel your pain.
It's funny. So yeah, so many stories here.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That was just so well described. I could just imagine every moment. Thank you for painting that beautiful picture. So I'm just wondering, you have a soapbox moment right now. What would you like to promote? Give me your pitch.
Yes. If you're into Web3 blockchain, please check out our website. If you're not, also check out for curiosity, but most of our use cases are around Web3 and blockchain. And the idea really is that we are building this platform that anyone can automate their Web3 and blockchain activities. Meaning, if you want to set up alerts to know when a new thing comes out or a new NFT or a certain cryptocurrency price gets hit, or if you want to automate something like a stop loss based on whatever Elon Musk tweeted today, this is the platform for it.
So what's the website? Spell it out for our listeners.
Boto.io, BOTO.io.
Perfect.
It's free to use, so come set up an account and just encourage you to check out our Explorer. You're going to see there are many recipes. There are over 400 bot recipes built by the community, and play around, create something. And I want to see what you create.
That sounds great. How do you make money from this?
We do have our premium tiers, which we call Pro. Those are paid versions. So some features are only available there and mostly high usage. So for most users, if you're not on a high usage need, you should be able to just use the free features unless you really need something specific. Like in this case, we have just a few features like posting on Twitter, for example, because Twitter is not the most friendly platform for bots. So it's a bit limited. It's complicated for us to provide.
I see. So it just depends on the tier. So it's a tiered approach.
Exactly. So the free tier covers pretty much everything. Almost every feature is available on the free tier. It's just there's a limit of usage. You can have as many bots as you want is unlimited, but your bots will be limited in terms of how many actions per day they can do things. It's fairly generous. Like I said, it's like I think 85% of our users never hit those limits. But if you are in the high usage, you're going to have to move into Pro if you want to take advantage fully of the automation you're using.
I see. Yeah. It sounds like a really useful platform.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to have to check it out after our interview.
Thank you.
So tell me, what brings out the best in you in a work environment? When you hire somebody new or if you take on a big partner, what conditions bring out the best in Breno?
Yes. One of them is efficiency.
Don't waste your time, right?
Yeah, none of our time. Like most of the people I hired at the beginning, they were senior in the sense that they had experience and they could hit the ground running and they were fairly independent. But for me, more important is that you take ownership, right? So no excuses. It's okay if things don't work out, it fails or delays, but in general, take ownership and you have initiative. So even if you don't know about something, you're going to figure it out. I think those are attributes that I really value. And if you want to bring the best in me, be efficient in the way you communicate. Don't come with a long story without any point and never getting to that point. That drives me nuts. And if you have something to say. If you have different opinions, please share. I listen to everyone and I like everyone in the company to listen to everyone regardless of their experience, position. I like to say, like, if you're right, you're right.
Very nice. So is there anything else you would like to say?
No, I think this is mostly it. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for taking the time. And I love the questions. Super interesting.
Well, I love the answers. I really enjoyed hearing what you had to say, and I'm sure that the listeners for the Culture and Leadership Connections podcast will love them as much as I do, if not more. So thank you so much for being a guest today, and I hope you have an absolutely wonderful day, and I wish you all the best with your company. It sounds fabulous.
Thank you.
From his early childhood, Breno Araujo learned to code and build software in a tiny apartment in Brazil that he shared with 7 other family members. His Brazilian background and culture helped him to see the importance of people in tech, but putting that into practice was not that easy for him. His tendency to argue, combined with an ability to learn at top speed, caused him to be impatient. Yet, his desire to encourage others rather than shut them down, together with self-awareness and effort, helped him to smooth out the rough edges of his original approach. Something I found particularly interesting about Breno's story is how he overcame the challenge of dyslexia by understanding deeply and memorizing things he couldn't read or write down. When he started his own tech company, he put his people learnings right next to his tech expertise, hiring a manager of community to keep the customer and employee relationships strong while he worked on the vision, efficiencies, and tech of the company. I really enjoyed Breno's honest self-appraisal and his enthusiasm and passion for his work. Remember to share this episode with a friend or colleague and to rate and review it right on our podcast webpage, shiftworkplace.com/podcast, where you can scroll down to Breno's page with his show notes and have the rate and review as well as the buy me a coffee options in one place. Thank you for listening, and may culture and leadership connections continue to guide and inspire your day. Want to show some appreciation? You can buy me a coffee. What? How do you buy a coffee for a podcast owner? Well, there's a way. Let me explain. You go to buymeacoffee.com/Marie Gervais. That's spelled MarieGervais. So it's buymeacoffee.com/Marie Gervais. And when you go to that website, what's going to happen is you'll get a chance to click on 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 cups of coffee at $5 a piece to help contribute to the cost of the podcast. And yes, it's $5 for a cup of coffee because it's quality coffee for a quality podcast. So I hope you will contribute and you'll help us to reduce the costs of the podcast by going to buymeacoffee.com/Marie Gervais. Thank you in advance for your generous contribution.